Welcome everyone to Almost Cancelled. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about Debris, Season 1, Episode 5. It's called Earthshine, so full spoilers for the episode, as always. And I don't know if I mentioned this last episode or last review, but I did hear that after 4 or 5 episodes, it was supposed to go more into the season-long serialized story. The idea that we were going to get a few Case of the Week shows, and then it would move on to more serialized. And I definitely felt that in this episode, at the very least. Whether or not it goes back to Case of the Week stuff next week, this one definitely felt like it was tapping into more of the overall plot, because it was dealing more with a threat from influx rather than just a random occurrence that happened because there's debris somewhere. It was debris that was weaponized by the potentially evil group. We'll see how evil. Admittedly, this episode did make them feel more just straight up villainous. So maybe the twist will be with Finola's father, not that he is just the leader of Influx, but he himself is a bit of a shithead. I mean, to put it, in the simple terms. But I'm expecting something along those lines. The idea that he's being forced to do what he's doing just feels almost. It would almost be more surprising if he is kidnapped and he is being forced at this point. That's genuinely how I feel. But as per usual with this show, I'm digging some of the concepts that are being brought up science fiction wise. I thought the opening scene was pretty good. There's a scene in a bus with a man sort of making some small talk with a woman who's sitting there. He tells her that her glove has fallen down, and they're kind of just small talking about gloves and stupidity and whatever. And then all of a sudden, the sound goes. There's like a high pitched kind of whine, and there's no sound. And they can't hear themselves speak. They're really freaked out by this. It's got a very surreal kind of feeling to it. And then the bus seemingly goes through a portal, although later to be confirmed to be just more of a straight up wormhole, and appears somewhere else in the country. It turns out to be Boston. The bus came from New Jersey, teleported to Boston. Now, teleportation is something they've already got, because we've seen them use it. We've seen them eat something to make them teleport. Although later in the episode, we see that there's perhaps some effects to doing this too much. So more on that later. But I thought just the overall tone of this and the eeriness of it, there was some almost 2001-esque music playing a little bit here, but certainly later on in another scene as well. Some of the other regular music wasn't featuring in this episode as much, but that's okay because it was focusing on different things. But I kind of dug the feeling. Honestly, the only real critique I'd have of the opening scene, which I thought was a very good way of building intrigue, of setting up the mystery of what's going on in this episode, was maybe the performance of the actor to, after the bus, or maybe in a tram actually, now I'm thinking about it, but after it goes through the portal. Actually, no, I think it was a bus. It just looked like a tram when it landed because the tires had been blown off, so the wheels looked more like tram wheels. Anyway, but he's the last survivor. The one guy we heard speak before is the only person who's still alive, and he's crawling out of the thing. And there's someone else there, someone menacing. And when our characters arrive at the scene, after looking for a little bit, they find him in a nearby building, but he's been killed. He's been shot. But there's been DNA samples taken, and they theorize that this was a test. This was a proof of concept that they can do this now. They knew there'd been tests with debris to do this kind of wormhole effect, but it hadn't worked. It wasn't successful. The people who tried it, I think they said the Chinese, ended up like spaghetti, like human spaghetti, I think was the way Brian put it. So, but clearly they're getting better at it. They're advancing their understanding of the tech. They're using it in smarter situations. And whether or not the rest of the episode is a test or more of an actual display, because one of the things that really came out of Influx in this episode is at least some of them, if not all of them, are straight up zealots. I think we got the impression back from the first episode when we had the deal and that the opening. It kind of felt like they were mostly just out to make money. And that's kind of what the characters thought as well. It kind of felt like, they're just dealers, they're just testing things. And even after this test at the start of the episode, this was just, that's just to prove to a buyer that it can work. And then they'll sell it for, a shit ton of money. But as the episode goes on, we get a couple of different examples. We have the bald guy who they find in the CCTV footage from the bus disappearance. he ends up being in New York where they're expecting another incident. Well, actually, they're not expecting anything. They've just tracked him to New York, and then while they're there, the noise thing hits, and there's, oh shit, it's going to happen. It's going to be bigger. There's going to be something bigger than a bus that goes through a wormhole. And when they encounter him, he very quickly, says some very ominous things about. He has almost a Hydra-esque line where he says, like, "I shall simply be replaced. The technology will be free," or something to that effect, and then kills himself. And so we have him, but then we have the guy who I brought up this last week, that from episode 3 there was a character who one of the commenters thought was Maddox, and I think I understood why they thought that in the scene itself. Although seeing him in this episode, this member of Influx, it was literally night and day, because in this episode we see him in broad daylight, and more importantly we hear him speak, and when he speaks, it doesn't, there's not even a comparison between them really. He sounds completely different. He looks different when he's speaking. But I got why someone thought that though, and that one quick shot we got at a nighttime scene, it made sense. But later on, he's the one who doesn't want to teleport, and the leader of the group that we've been seeing with the beard, whose name is Ash, who I don't really remember from the show. I'm just looking at it on IMDb, but he's like, no, this must be done. And it, there's a whole, as far as the tech goes, there's some figuring out about it needs to steel or metal sort of rods of some kind on either side. It doesn't have to be literal rods. In the file for this experiment that they got from China or whatever, it was 2 like giant bulldozers. It was like the bulldozing arms that were acting as the rods. So it can be anything as long as it's 2 sort of high points and made of metal, presumably, maybe specifically steel. And obviously some intrigue to that stuff, because that file was like erased, and MI6 get a hold of it. That's how it eventually gets to Finola. But Maddox claims to not know why it's not there, because at first I was thinking it was to do with his shady business, his shady dealings with the Russians from a couple of episodes ago. Maybe it was something to do with that. But we'll see if that turns out to be the case, because it didn't feel like he was working with Influx. But then again, maybe he is and he just doesn't know that. Maybe he thinks he's dealing with just nationals, and he's actually trading with people who are working for Influx. I mean, that's entirely possible. So there's a bit of intrigue there. But it becomes this, okay, so any 2 large structures, alright, we're only in Manhattan. It's not like there's not a lot of tall buildings or anything. They narrow it down, though, based on the types of buildings and just whatever. There was some reasoning in the scene. There's some mumbo jumbo, and they track down these buildings. It has to be 2 of them. Maddox is there on site, which is different than usual. But he goes to one location which is the one where nothing really happens. Finola finds one. Brian doesn't think he's found one, but then turns out that the debris is there. There's just no people there right now. Until, of course, he goes back, and then the gunmen come out, and there's a bit of a tense situation where the techie gets shot, and she's trying to tell Brian how to like shut the thing down, because they're literally, I mean, it's ultimately a terrorist attack. There's going to be, I mean, I think Brian assumes it's going to be a portion of a city that's moved, and that might exactly be what it is. I was thinking building when they first said it was going to be bigger, based on the radius of the noise, but maybe we'll find out in a later episode. Maybe they'll try this again. That said, though, the good guys do have the tech, and I say good guys in theory. I mean, Maddox is in charge of it, and who knows where he's going to end up, selling it to or trading it to for other things. But this was this was interesting enough. The tech was good. I mean, I don't know if the rest of the episode ever quite lived up to the coolness of the opening scene in terms of the tech, the debris itself. I did quite enjoy the actual moment where Brian's kind of trying to mess with the frequencies and sort of get it to shut down. We haven't seen a whole lot about how they control the tech or how they operate the debris. So it was kind of neat seeing some of that, and the relief when they kind of diffuse it, as it were. Obviously, a lot of this episode, though, was focused a little bit more on Finola, because obviously she learned last episode about her father being alive. She's emotional when she sees security camera footage of the people she knows is involved with her father, and she's obviously still thinking that he's been kidnapped and he's under duress. So that's all cool, and it does create a kind of a tension between her and Brian, where she's very cold to him. She when he confronts her about it early in the episode, why she's acting so weird, he thinks it's just because they disagreed about how to deal with the last case, and she kind of says it's okay, we disagree, we can move on, it's fine, I'm good. And she's clearly not. She's very emotional. She's having a hard time dealing with all these things. And some of this is good, some of this is... It's funny, because I wasn't super into the sister stuff, when her sister phones and she gives her a little talk, and her sister basically needs some help because she's at the hospital, she's with a friend. Ultimately, Finola tells her sister to go home. And I wasn't necessarily feeling the scene all that much. I get the purpose of trying to introduce like a family element for her, especially someone that she shares her father with. I mean, literally, because it's a sister, right? But in the idea that there's someone else to care about him in some way, and what that means for Finola. But later on in the episode, Finola kind of goes off book a little bit because she has a chance to tail Ash. She has a chance to tail this guy that's behind her father's situation. And she follows him around. He kind of pulls a bit of a Michael Myers and disappears and then appears behind her. That said, we know he has the tech that conceivably can pull that off. But he kind of grabs her hand when she goes for a gun, and they just have this moment, and he says, you have his eyes, and doesn't indicate one way or another. Because part of me was wondering, when she first encounters some of the members of Influx and they start trading fire back and forth, I thought it was curious if they knew who she was, and B, if, are they allowed to kill her? I'm kind of assuming that her father's in some way in charge of what's going on with them. I wonder if, as soon as they realize who she is there oh no, we're not allowed to hurt her, we have to find another way out of this. Because I didn't necessarily feel like Ash was going to hurt her necessarily. I mean, he might have done, and obviously the agents show up and tackle him, and they have him in custody at the end of the episode. And that's where I was sort of getting back around to the other sister stuff, which is the sister wanted to remember this song, the Spanish song that from their childhood, and she sends her a video of a home movie of them listening to this song, and you can hear the father's voice holding the camera, and it's them. It's the two sisters as little girls, and they're dancing to this song. And it's this kind of sweet moment, and Finola's, crying a little bit. And the weird part of the ending, of course, is that it cuts into the van, into the police van, and Ash is singing the song as she's watching the video. Which, I mean, what exactly is going on there? Is it because is he using debris tech that has let him connect to her because he made physical contact earlier in the episode? Is it because it's a digital thing that's happening in the vicinity? Is that why he's hearing it and sort of sensing what's happening? I don't know. There's a number of possibilities, I suspect, but very curious. It was definitely a creepy ending, so that was good. But a lot of the Finola stuff was definitely the trust issues with Brian, and prodding him to maybe question, should he trust Maddox? Do you believe Maddox when he says he doesn't know why that file's not there? And Brian gets very kind of stern, says, no, I trust him, he tells me everything. And we're like, oh, does he? Because he's not even telling anyone, everyone he works with everything. We know he's doing shady stuff, behind the scenes, off book. And we see who he's like with his wife. I'll get to that scene separately, but so that's a kind of a running theme. And then again at the end of the episode, Finola wants to talk to Ash, and Maddox says, no, let me look at that first, but I'll tell you anything I find out. And she is civil and says, I'd appreciate that. But there's an underlying kind of, I think that's one of the best things that they've established in the episode, I think, is that every time someone gives her a stock answer for why they can't just tell her something or let her do something, and she's cordial about it, but you can kind of see that the gears turning in her head about what this conversation actually is, and that she's being cock blocked essentially from the information she wants, from the access that she wants. So, simple stuff. It works well enough. I don't think everything in this episode completely lands. The sister stuff, I think, is a good thing to be building. because so much of this show so far has been about the personal connections, and I think Finola's connection to her sister and her father are obviously going to be important because it's one of our main characters' human connections. And then Brian's, of course, are kind of up in the air, but he clearly has issues. Although Brian has got some cool action this episode, he gets to do a bit of a slide and shoot a bad guy. He has a little slick move. But I will say there was definitely some stuff in this that felt a little bit more just mumbo jumbo. That was kind of that felt just kind of mumbo jumbo-y in a way that when they were explaining the building stuff, when they were explaining how to turn the debris off, it felt like either they were glossing over things because they haven't really got solid answers for how some of this stuff works, or they just want to tease it and maybe explain it more later, which is fine. I mean, the latter is completely fine for the most part, but there was definitely some little bits and pieces like that. For example, the one that kind of bugged me is that they thought that the two pieces of debris in the separate buildings had to be in sync. And they make a whole point where that's why one of them looks like it's not the place. And then Brian goes back, and then they have this shock moment where someone over the comm says, "Hey, I don't know how they're doing this, but suddenly they're in sync now. Like, they didn't have to be on at the same time. Now the other one's been turned on by Teleporting Man." And it kind of... It just kind of felt weird because when they brought that up, when they sort of pointed out, "Oh, that's weird," I expected a follow-up conversation, maybe not an answer as to why they're able to do this, but a follow-up conversation to at least explain to me why this is important, what this means, and or at least just reiterate the question and say, "Hey, this is an important detail for later, that these two things, these two pieces of debris should have been working in sync, but they were able to offset it and still make it work, seemingly." I feel like that should have been hit home again by the end of the episode, if nothing else, to maybe imply, oh, they've got other debris tech that lets them sort of like warp time or something, so they're kind of doing it at different time periods and then syncing them up later, or there's something, whatever it may be. So that was a little bit, it's a minor thing, it's not a huge thing, but there is that. What's funny is that I enjoyed that this focused on the main plot of the show and dealing with Influx finally as a threat, building some intrigue as to this villainous group and what they actually are, and some of that stuff is interesting. But bizarrely, I actually kind of missed having like a cool how do I say, a gimmick, but something that the episode was revolving around, like the change of atmosphere, like the window into the other dimension, like whatever, like all those other things, like I thought really gave the episodes this really cool identity. And I think this is solid, and I'm excited to delve further into the serialized stuff, and I do think it should and will probably only just get better. But at least right now, I think it would almost have been more ballsy to actually have the villains pull the thing off and actually move, like, 3 blocks of Manhattan away or something like that. Because it would have been an interesting visual, if nothing else. Because I like the idea of what they were doing with the tech, but I think one of the things that I've really loved about the previous few episodes is that the tech has ultimately revealed something on an emotional level, right? And I know it gets a little bit saccharine at times, and I've said when it's maybe went a touch too far in places, because it's funny, because I said that maybe the most saccharine it got, that it maybe stepped over a line for me, was last episode with the speech that the brother character gave, but I still might have liked that one the most in hindsight. Like, I was thinking about it after I watched this episode, that might be my favorite one for a lot of other reasons, though. This one, because it becomes about the the villainous group doing something, we don't really get much of a moral or something revealed from the tech, I suppose, because Finola's revelation it really came last week. It's only just this week that she's starting to really kind of get a feel for all these things, and like having to play this trust game with Brian. And of course, I look forward to how they somehow become properly united later in the season. Whether that's in a couple episodes time, or maybe they save that for the finale or whatever, we'll see. But I'm into it. So no, it was a fun episode. There was definitely some elements that were a little contrived. I'll just throw this in here as well. As much as I like the reasoning that, okay, they've tracked them to this hotel, but there was only three members of the group, and we know there was like 5 or 6, and there's a hotel across the street. Maybe they were in the hotel across the street, and that's when the bald guy from the CCTV footage walks out, and then we have the whole scene where he shoots himself. And I like the scene in where it goes. Like I think it obviously set up some really important ideas about who this group are and what they believe, and that they're devout, and just the fact that they believe something. They're doing this for a purpose. They believe in something. But I did think it was a little just, oh, he just walked out in front of us. And there's ways for that to work, but I think the logic of, oh, they're probably in the hotel over there was fine, but maybe the fact that he walked out right after Brian said this to Finola is what made it feel really, really contrived. But again, there's a few minor nitpicks in this one, but ultimately I'm into what it's doing still. But hey, good. And like I say, when the thing was about to go off and we were in the, it was essentially a ticking time bomb where they think, oh, they're going to teleport like X number of the buildings or the streets or whatever. The 2001-esque music, particularly, it was making me think of when the Beyond Jupiter stuff from 2001. I was hearing some influence of that in the music as this thing was potentially going to actually trigger. And I thought that added a really good feeling to the scene and a really good sort of otherworldly tone, which is something I've appreciated about the show in general. But this is something sort of bigger. This is, dare I say, more monolithic. Not there's a monolith in the episode, but you know what I mean. Like it feels it's something of like a higher caliber to just the ethereal from before. Now it feels like gargantuan in front of us in terms of what we can comprehend as human beings. So I dig that. So hey, that's episode 5 of Debris. I look forward to the next one. So let me know what you thought of this episode in the comments below. Please do like and subscribe. Oh, I forgot about Maddox. Hold on, I forgot about Maddox. Before I wrap up, just a quick scene with his wife. They're in couples therapy. She wants to move away to a different city. He's dedicated to his job, but insists that the number one thing he wants is to be with his family, to be with his son. It was okay scene. I think what I liked the most about it is that at least before the subject of moving comes up, I kind of liked that when they're talking about their therapy session, they're actually not getting mad and saying, you didn't say anything today. She just sort of raises, hey, you were kind of quiet today, like more than usual. And he says, yeah, well, I worry that she thinks that I speak too much, or I try to like take control of the sessions. And he's like, it's funny, I thought you were a little bit quiet. And I don't know, it felt like a more mature conversation than I'm used to, at least to begin with. Once the subject of moving came up, they just kind of got mad at each other very quickly. It became a bit more generic, but hey. Again, it's just building the human connections for Maddox, who is very much our third main character. Which I think, and a lot of the stuff that they're building with these characters in terms of who they care about, the lives around them, their loved ones, is all going to be very relevant, I think, when our main characters are forced into positions where they have to make choices, and or at least give them stakes when they're in jeopardy and when they have to make decisions. So yeah, okay, cool. Alright, so guys, on patreon.com/mailfuzztv, you can support us over there for as little as $1 per month. But that is me. So thank you once again for watching and listening. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?